Golazo! Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Monday, March 12th, 2018. Today we talk about the USL to start the week. It's our Eastern Conference preview. And to talk about the USL, we have a friend of the show coming on the line, Evan Villela of the USL show. Evan, good morning.
Morning, Kev. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. Evan, Duane Rollins here. Yeah, the way that we start these generally when we're doing a general preview is to just ask you generally. That's a lot of generals for Monday morning. But
I think I got you.
Yeah, in terms of what to think of this year, to give the casual fan what the big storylines are in the USL East this year.
Oh man. As far as the league itself, I think by and large, basically every team got better than last year, which is interesting. And then for people that might not know what USL is about, or maybe looking for a couple names of guys to watch for, really you're starting to see the MLS utilize USL players more. Mark Anthony Kay, a guy that played a lot last year for Louisville City. A few others I know. Deshaun Brown was with Tampa Bay for a little bit last year before DC United called him up, and they actually just signed Dane Kelly, who was the USL leading scorer. And then I know Atlanta United snapped up Romario Williams, who not only played really well for Charleston, but also Jamaica in the Gold Cup. And then Mitch Hildebrand as well, who was the U.S. Open Cup darling of last year and Cincinnati's kind of stalwart keeper since they started 2 years ago.
All right. You mentioned Atlanta. They're starting this year. Obviously, they had such a bang in MLS in their launch. Should we expect a similar sort of high-end launch for the Atlanta 2 team or something a little less?
So that's interesting. I'm not terribly sure, and I think a lot of people who cover the league closely aren't terribly sure what to expect from Atlanta, just because we're not sure how the partnership is going to work out between the first team and the USL team in terms of what kind of talent they're gonna drop in, or even if they're gonna work on using the academy kids more. But honestly, the amount of really good teenagers they had, like I said, Romario Williams, they're pretty deep at goalkeeper with they have, was it Brad Guzan and then Mitch Hildebrandt and then Alec Kahn are all there. So those are three guys that could definitely start in pretty much any league in the United States. But we really don't know how they're going to look. I'd imagine it's going to be good just because of the amount of talent that club has kind of, top down.
Now, when we're looking at the Eastern Conference, there's one team that feels left out of the Eastern Conference, and for me, that's St. Louis. Poor St. Louis, they're losing their rivals, now going to play in the Western Conference.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
what do you think, Evan? What do you think about the new alignment of the teams for 2018 season?
So kind of the worst kept secret is that the USL is really considering going to 3 divisions instead of 2 conferences. So they do East, Central, and West. For St. Louis, it kind of felt like a little bit of a momentum killer, honestly. They got Anthony Poulos from Orlando City B. He brought in a bunch of guys, and that seems to be a really solid squad. The nice thing is they move over to the Western Conference, which is a little weaker, and I'm not just saying that because I'm here to talk about the Eastern Conference. But, I mean, for them, really, the downside to moving out to the West is, one, they already did it 2 years ago, so they've been Western Conference, Eastern Conference, Western Conference the last 3 years, which I'm sure is mind-numbing for supporters and even the players in the front office and everything. But even then, it's the travel's a lot worse out in the Western Conference. They're going out to Los Angeles and Phoenix and Colorado, and as opposed to where they would stay kind of in the East, it's St. Louis, and your lowest teams are Tampa Bay, and your farthest up teams are Ottawa and Toronto. So hopefully for them, there's a Central Division, and they move again into the Central next year, and then just kind of stay there. But yeah, no, it's definitely not fun for anybody from what I'm hearing out of St. Louis.
Evan, you talked about the influx of player going to Major League Soccer after a few years of experience in the USL. Yeah. You mentioned MAK, and you mentioned Romario Williams. Let's not forget Romario Williams was drafted by the Montreal Impact a few years ago, never panned out.
Sorry. Sorry to bring that
up. I know, right? I'm like, geez. What is interesting to me in the Eastern Conference especially is we have teams drafting, especially the MLS 2 side. So I'll talk about New York, for example, one of the powerhouse in the Eastern Conference over the last few years, Red Bulls 2. And it doesn't seem like it's going to stop. And then you see homegrowns debuting in MLS and scoring goals like mine this weekend coming from Red Bulls 2. How important is that Red Bulls 2 team for the USL Eastern Conference as basically one of the quote-unquote almost dynasty of this league now?
Sure. And I think, honestly, that applies to pretty much every MLS2 side. Red Bull are using it. The Union are using it with Bethlehem Steel. They had Austin Trusty in their 18. He started and played a full 90. Anthony Fontana got a goal in his MLS debut, a guy that played a little bit in Bethlehem last year. But for Red Bull, it's really fascinating, and it's a credit to that organization, which, as a Union fan, I've said that probably way too much for a lot of people. But credit to Red Bull, they're a team that seems to have a strong USL side and then kind of, pick their guys that they want to bring up, Derek Etienne Jr., Vincent Bezecourt, Florian Velo kind of goes back and forth. Ben Mines, like you said, and they're able to kind of strip their USL team, but their academy is so strong that they're able to fill those guys with academy kids, and then the cycle kind of repeats. So it's almost mechanical how that works for Red Bull, and honestly, with their success they've had, they won the Cup 2 years ago and pretty much ran the league 2 years ago. And then, not as strong as the year last year, but they still made the playoffs. And I think, those MLS 2 sides catch a little bit of flack from people who don't want that sort of B team kind of feeling in USL. But for them to perform well and prove that they can play at that level, regardless of who's in and out of the squad every week, is got to be really nice for USL, because it doesn't feel like those are cheap wins or, terrible losses to take.
Yeah, well, that sort of bleeds into the question that I typically ask in this. I had in the Ottawa Fury preview we did last week, I had that question to him, and he sort of, the gentleman that was previewing for us, Furry Fanatic there, he said, we want him to have, like, what most fans want is for the USL 2 teams for the MLS 2 teams to have their own division. I'm thinking, well, they had that once before and they didn't want that, so that's unlikely to happen. So what is the role of the two teams? Is this 3-division thing the answer, where we sort of have whatever they want to go, they find their level? Because obviously Red Bulls too do very well competitively too. So really, is it fair to lump them all together?
Well, and that's the thing, right? So Whitecaps 2 dropped, Orlando City B have dropped, and a lot of people think that they're going to come back in Division 3, which is fair and totally understandable, and that's something that I think teams that aren't currently playing this year are going to take a look at, maybe a Rochester even. But at the same time, the big thing that I heard, at least from Bethlehem Steel's head coach, Brendan Burke, and I think a lot of people kind of echoed it throughout that year last year, was the quality of play from Division 3 to Division 2, or, when USL was kind of growing 2 years ago to last year, just got so much higher. I think it's going to be a really hard sell to tell those teams to go down. They're successful, and obviously Swope Park in the West has been making the final there the last 2 years. So it's one of those things where I totally understand, if people kind of resent those MLS 2 teams in a way, or don't feel like they should be in USL proper, or that Division 3 should be a pathway, or kind of like the MLS Reserve League was. But like you said, there's a reason that didn't work out, and maybe it's because there was not enough MLS clubs buying into player development in the way that it's panned out in USL, where you have your academy and then you have USL where guys can get pro minutes, and then you bring them up to MLS, or you stash your draft picks for a year and see if they can give you anything that you don't already have, and then sign them from there. But yeah, it's one of those things where we're really not going to know what's going to happen until it happens, unfortunately. And I can see both sides of the coin, but in my head, I kind of land on the side of, it's going to be a lot harder to get all those MLS 2 teams to drop down to Division 3, just because of the quality of play.
To that note, I'm here in Toronto, obviously, and the team that I follow in USL the most closely is TFC 2, which has been not very good on the field.
No.
That's
yeah,
arguably the worst team in USL.
Yeah.
Now, I get a little bit of a sense that there's been sort of a mandate within TFC here to make them better on the pitch this year in terms of the competitiveness, to not be such a sort of, someone referred to them as a high school all-star team the other day. I mean, they are very young. Do you think that maybe that's something that USL as a league is sort of trying to tell the MLS teams is like, it's fine that you can be development focused, but maybe put a few extra players in there, a few older players in there to make them better? Do you think that's a mandate coming from them?
Maybe. So also, and I don't think it's necessarily a mandate, and I agree, actually. I think Toronto FC, obviously they lost Brandon Aubrey, who was a great center back for them, but it's one of those things where I think as much as the USL would love to just say, here's what you should do as an MLS club that has a team in our league, and here's all these benefits that you're going to get from it, you can't really force a team to see that, if you know what I mean. So I think Toronto looking around and seeing what Red Bull are doing, seeing what Bethlehem are doing, even seeing what teams like Cincy are doing or Charleston are doing, or even just, the amount of players that you can play or the pool that you have in USL has helped them out a good bit. And honestly, with guys like Raheem Edwards, even where, he was in USL for a little bit, then plays for the first team and does well enough. I think Toronto's finally starting to see the fruits kind of bear on that development pipeline, if you will. And they're sort of starting to take notice on that. Obviously, Toronto's a little different because they're not a team that necessarily is hurting for money and or star power at the moment. So, maybe that kind of factored into things, but I don't think it's necessarily a USL league mandate in terms of, do this or else. But I think a lot of MLS teams, you see, I think DC is going to come in with the two side. Dallas is thinking about coming in with the two side. So I think it's just to kind of keep that competitiveness with your academies and everything like that, because offering those guys pro minutes is a huge thing in terms of, luring them into your system and letting them play.
You mentioned the R word, and by that I mean Rochester. The Rhinos, the defunct Rochester Rhinos, at least for 2018. How weird is it to see a USL alignment with the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference when no Rochester, a mainstay in the North American soccer lower division landscape? What is your thought on the hiatus or pre-folding of Rochester, and do you think we'll see them back next year?
Oh, man. Do I think we'll see them back next? I hope so. And this is a really ugly opinion, and it's probably unpopular, but I don't see it, unfortunately. Honestly, the statements put out by the owners of the club and everything, or their weird attempt to try to crowdfund, to get money for the season, felt like they were just kind of grasping at straws at that point, if I'm honest. But I mean, to answer the initial question, how does it feel to not have, a USL season with the Rhinos involved? It's really disappointing. Not only have they been kind of, the one of the old guard members of the league, they were successful in the Open Cup. They were terribly hard to beat at home. They were a solid team. They didn't have the biggest budget for the roster or anything like that, but Bob Lilly made it work. I'm actually terrified that he's in Pittsburgh now, because that's a really solid looking side. But to not have the Rhinos there is awful. I really hope they're back in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, I think Jake Edwards kind of gave them an open invitation, the president of the league, to come back in any capacity next year, and I hope they do. But I'm not optimistic, because we've seen this happen with the Austin Aztecs and the Wilmington Hammerheads and a couple other teams before them, where as soon as you throw that hiatus word around, it's pretty much your death sentence. So. Holding out hope, but I'm not holding my breath that they're going to come back, unfortunately, and I hate saying that. But.
Yeah, it hurts us all, because especially like me in Montreal, I've been watching the Rhinos play since before it was cool, so since like 1999. So right. I have a lot of experience of watching the Rhinos and eating at Dino's Barbecue, and I will really miss going to Rochester to eat some barbecue.
Yeah,
exactly. One thing that really catches my attention when we're looking at the USL as a whole is, you mentioned Bob Lilly, coaches. There's coaches that's been in this league forever, and there's other type of coaches. You have like the John Willianek, who's in his future, he wants to be an MLS coach. We've talked to him on USL Radio a few years ago, and he talked about how eventually he will want a higher position, and he's in a development program. how do you, if you were the general manager, technical director of a USL team, which ideology would you choose, Evan? Would you choose like a head coach who is have a lot of experience, who can mold and teach and maybe coach young players to be effective at USL level, and a lot of veterans that create a competitive squad? Or would you take a John Willianek type of coach where he's going to help bring the players to an MLS level but still be competitive in the meantime? What would you do?
I think Toronto would be kind of my roadmap in terms of, they had Coach Bent come in. He was there a couple of years. He's hungry. Maybe not the best player development, but obviously, now he moves up to the first team in an assistant level, and then they bring in another guy whose name I forget, and it's French, so I won't pronounce it right even. But who's had plenty of experience working, in France, obviously with their youth level, and who's coached a lot of the guys that are in charge of developing youth in the United States. That being said, if I didn't have to pick one person, or if I'm not modeling one team, I would want one of those younger, hungry coaches that doesn't necessarily want to stay in USL forever. Because as much as it's about developing players, it should also be about developing coaches. Because there's going to be a year or a time, or a time frame maybe, where a lot of the older coaches that have been around forever, get passed by the tactics and things like that, not just in USL, but I think in MLS or even around the world. And I would want to be on the forefront of that, because I think if you have a younger coach who's maybe got some college soccer experience who can develop some kids, you bring them in and let them loose. I think that's a solid success level. And, obviously it depends on the team and what you want to do with your club. But by and large, I think the USL is a league of younger coaches, really. And we've seen that work out. Mark Briggs is doing an excellent job in Real Salt Lake, but, Mike Petke was there for a little bit before him. So, it's an interesting dynamic and an interesting landscape. But I think, a lot of the clubs that have kind of the younger coaches, and, John Wolniak is a perfect example of a guy that I'd love to bring in. He's fantastic.
The name of the coach, by the way, is Laurence Guillot. So I'm French. I can say it without.
Yeah, please. That was kind of my lifeline to you. Was I needed the French Canadian that kind of helped me out with that one. So I appreciate it.
There you go. I lean on Kevin for the French stuff too. All right, we're a North American show, but our roots are in Canada with our Two Solitudes show, so we still have a lot of Canadian listeners and a lot of Ottawa Fury listeners. So I did want to ask you specifically about what you thought the Fury would look like this year. I had a chance to see them on Friday too. They're stylistically much different than they were last year. I'll say that.
Sure. So unfortunately, over in the USL show land, my podcast, we ran through our Eastern Conference predictions, and I put them 14th. Which is not going to make anyone like me much better up in the nation's capital. But I haven't gotten the chance to see them play. I've always been impressed with them, and honestly, I had them as kind of a bubble playoff team last year. Yeah, I mean, Carl Hayworth is a guy that's been there forever. He's great. I believe they still have Dos Santos, who was a Rhino.
Yeah,
for
they do. Yeah,
great forward. So the pieces are there. I don't know what it was about the Fury last year that just didn't click. And I know they have a bit of an agreement with the Impact for kind of an affiliate deal, which didn't seem to be used a whole lot last year, which is fine and kind of expected because, obviously when you're just on an affiliate deal and you don't have the two team, it's a bit harder to control who gets minutes, obviously. Not a team that I rate super highly, but again, I think everyone improved. So I don't know if that's a fault of the Fury or just that everyone around them got better. And it's one of those things, I think, once again this year, the last kind of 3 or 4 playoff spots are going to be up for grabs till pretty much the end of the season. So not a team that I'm like outwardly panicking about, but one that can definitely surprise some people.
Fair enough. By the way, Maxim Crepeau, the keeper that the Impact lent down, did not start in the final preseason friendly. So that tells you that they really don't have a lot of control over who plays.
You don't, and honestly, that's why a lot of those MLS2 teams popped up, because they were tired of guys. The Union and Harrisburg had an agreement, and they were tired of guys not getting minutes when they went there. So they formed Bethlehem, and now they've been using it as they please. And I think that's really the route that a lot of these teams see as one that's better for them than just having affiliate deals. Other than, obviously the Colorado Rapids stole Enzo Martinez from the Charlotte Independence. And then you had Sebastian last name that I can't remember or pronounce from San Antonio that went to New York City. So.
Fair enough. All right, you can't have a preview show without asking you for a preview. I force you right now. You have to make a pick. Who's going to be representing the East in the USL Championship game this year?
Can I make a caveat of if their road form
Sure.
improves any bit at all in the slightest, meaning they win more than like one game, the Tampa Bay Rowdies are going to be there?
Okay, that's fair enough one, and that is who I picked last year, and was surprised that they weren't. But nonetheless, that's a good pick. All right, do thank you, Evan, for your time today. Hopefully, we can have you on later on this year. Interesting stuff. Thanks again.
Yep, no problem, guys. Take care.
You can listen to Evan on the USL show, available on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. You'll find the USL show, and we'll be right back after the break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane Rollins with myself, Kevin Laramee. Duane, what was in the water this weekend? I don't know about here in North America. Here things seems fine, but watching my telly, watching what happened at the London Stadium, then in Lille in France, and then in Greece to top it all off, the cherry on top of that Sunday. Yeah, it was a weird weekend.
Yeah. Natives are getting restless. We're getting near the end of the year. Spring's coming. I don't know. It's like spring fever, maybe. I don't know. Each of those incidents are kind of unique unto its own, though, I think. And maybe we should talk about them each individually. Maybe, I guess, that might be the way to do this. And then, obviously, we're going to wrap up with the Canadian Review and our performances of the week in MLS to end the show. But we're going to go this right now. So, Kevin, where do you want to start with this? Do you want to start in England, maybe?
Let's go to West Ham. That's what I have in my background. I have the old man with the corner flag running after players on the pitch. Fans yelling at the owners. The owner was escorted out for his own security. Kids were put on the bench of the players for security reasons as well. Pitch invasion, almost a owner's box invasion. What happened in London?
Yeah, look, there's some history to the corner flag thing, and I'll get to that in a minute. But, I think the simple thing of what happened in London is a combination of a lack of success. That is really what triggers this, because really success kind of we were talking if we look back at the start of the season, we were talking about protests in Barcelona, right? We're not really hearing about protests in Barcelona anymore because they're successful this year. So lack of success is kind of your underlying thing that always sort of fuels this sort of anger. I think the main thing there, and I'm caveat this with think, because obviously there's probably more depth to this if you're a West Ham fan, but really it comes down to a feeling that they're losing the soul of their club, and the biggest symbolic thing for that is obviously where they play. They're in that Olympic Stadium. They're not happy there. They feel that they lost what they had before. A nice little intimate local ground in an area of London that's a little under, not that financially successful. It's a blue collar aesthetic there. That stadium sort of matched that. The fans matched that, and they feel that where they are now, they're not getting that sort of same feel about their club. And then to compound that, they're losing, and they're losing badly. They're on the relegation zone. They're threatening to go down. And West Ham's a proud club. Anyone who's been to London realizes that as much as we outside of England look at the big clubs in London as Spurs, Chelsea, Arsenal, West Ham is right there. Like, you see as much West Ham support as those three other bigger clubs that we all know of, and they're just more successful, those clubs. Like, you go in the downtown shops, you can buy scarves for 4 teams, and West Ham is one of those 4 teams. You don't find
Palace. You don't find Crystal Palace. No, you don't find Fulham either, but you do see West Ham.
Yeah, and you don't see teams from outside of London too. It's those 4 cities. So West Ham is arguably within, popularity-wise, obviously Liverpool and United would be up there as well in terms of the overall popularity. But outside of those two historic clubs there, I would say West Ham's right in the next mix of most popular teams in terms of overall support level within England, right? So this is a well-supported and historic team that's had success in the past, and they're frustrated right now. They're frustrated because they feel that their ambition, their desires aren't being matched by the board's performance, and to compound that, as I said, they're losing what they feel is their identity with the stadium move and some other stuff that's going on as well around the team, Kevin. That's, I think, the origin of that.
But still, I have to say the caveat as well that never is it okay to invade the pitch and start to go after players and start to wrestle players, to start to wrestle Noble, and then to fight, and then to in the stands. The security team did not do its job at the London Stadium this weekend. They were nowhere to be found. They were bystanders and onlookers, and they were not there to stop anything. And I think that was a dangerous atmosphere that could have gone awfully wrong, and we all have souvenirs and memories of bad days in stadiums that go awfully wrong, and kind of happy everyone came out injury free and alive, but still it's a situation that has to be taken a hard look in, and the FA itself has launched an investigation into what the hell happened in London and whose fault is it? Who left the first? Who was charged of? I don't want to say crowd control because it's not what it is, but it's management. Who was in charge of the crowd management in that game? There's a lot of things that went wrong, and I have to say I'm just happy this morning that at least no one was really injured.
No, of course, and look. For those that don't know, there was a planned protest march against the board before this match, so the tensions were already high heading into it. That ended up being canceled because of fractions within the West Ham supporters sort of fund and union of fans, because a bunch of people that were identifying themselves as the ICF, which is, for those that watch any hooligan show, know who the ICF is, one of the most infamous names within the old firms back in the bad old days of English football. And I doubt these people actually are anything to do with that. They're probably just a bunch of young piss and vinegar people that want to copy the old days, and for some really perverse reason. But at any rate, that name's getting thrown around, so they decided to cancel this march because they didn't want hooliganism to happen. Instead, what we have is this protest, this pitch invasion, which is ultimately emulates that hooliganism of the past. But certainly we didn't quite have the same violence outside the grounds as we would have seen back then, and thank God for that. The one thing that I will say, and I don't want to glorify this as you say, but the one action that we did see after the second goal, when they picked up the corner flag and marched it to the center and tried to plant it there, that does emulate a very successful protest from 1992. Which occurred in West Ham at that time, where a fan did the same thing and then sat in the middle and refused to move and forced people to move him off the pitch. And what that was about back then was what was called a bond scheme, which, to put it in North American terms, was very much like a seat licensing idea that West Ham had, that they were forcing fans to purchase bonds which would go towards basically the improvement of the stadium or the building of a new stadium eventually, in exchange for buying their season ticket. They were going to force them to buy those. And the fans, because as I said, they're not the most financially successful part of London, right? These fans are blue collar, and they said, no, we're not going to pay for a bond. There's like 20,000 of these things that West Ham was trying to sell. They only ended up selling 1,000 of them. So it was obviously a very unsuccessful campaign, and it was sort of put the exclamation mark on how unsuccessful it was with this pitch invasion that happened in 92. So that's why that person was doing that. He was emulating that protest for back in the day, but the rest of it was really just a lot of, pent up anger that was happening. And as you say, it's really, I'm all for protests that happen outside, the stadium and things like that, or in the stands with tifos and songs that are coordinated. And there's lots of effective ways that you can get your message across. Even what the United fans did, even though I think that back when they wore the green and the gold, based on their original colors to protest the Glazers, that in that type of protest, to me, is the way to go. And you still see green and gold people in Old Trafford, right, that are still frustrated with that. So that's the better way to do it, rather than just pure, a pitch invasion.
You never want to cross that physical line where the confrontation becomes physical, because then it can really, really escalate quickly in a stadium like this. Imagine if one guy would have shoved another guy. And as a reaction to that, you have a fight in your hands, and then it's 30, 40, 50 people fighting. You never know what can happen, and it can really be a dangerous situation. So just to finish off on the West Ham situation, I'm kind of happy everyone was safe. And another situation I was happy everyone was safe was in Greece. PAOK versus Ek. Duane, the owner, went on the pitch with a gun. Okay, he wasn't in his holster, but the guy had a pistol on the pitch telling the ref, you're done? The ref obviously you know what? I'm going to change my decision. I don't want to be killed when I get out of here. And the other team's like, well, you know what? You're going to change the decision? We're not going to play. Yeah, so that's 3 points for one side, and that comes off another controversy. It was a game against Olympiacos. The Greece Super League is in shambles. The Greece Super League cannot even control its own players, its own owners. The owner of PAOK is allegedly very shady connections, and if you look at how he reacted and the threats that he said to other teams, to other players, his assistant, the assistant coach, is the one that told the ref was done. He told the ref, and in that moment, in that situation, with everything that was going on, and his owner with a gun on his belt on the pitch, if you're telling the ref you're done, the ref's gonna think you're telling him that you're threatening his life, which basically that's what it was. It's just terrible. It has no place in this sport. I am so mad because this is gonna have repercussion on the entire sport in Greece, and this is when we talked about match fixing and we talk about how it takes the integrity out of the game, and then we're left wondering, are we watching something that's choreographed, that's prearranged, or that is just corrupted? That's what was going through my mind, watching an owner of a club with a gun on the pitch.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a different level than the West Ham. The West Ham stuff is disgruntled fans crossing a line, and that's unfortunate, but this is the whole other level. Yeah. This criminal was happened there. I mean, obviously there's a criminal element to invading a pitch, but that's trespassing, whereas opposed to this is, serious, felony criminal action we're seeing here.
It felt like a mafia. It felt like the mafia trying to, I'm not saying he was or was not part of the mafia. It's nothing to do with it, but the perception of it is like the mafia head honcho goes on the pitch and tells the ref, you know what? You're not going to call something against my... It's like Escobar telling the Deportivo Medellin Club Cali, or the other one, the region there, telling the refs in the early 90s that, you're not going to whistle against us, right? That's the feeling I got.
Yeah, well, no, it's intimidation, pure and simple. And you're right to call this history of the gentleman who owns his club suspect. And that's more what's happening here. To me, this is an illustration of how ownership in some of these parts of the world can be a little dodgy, to say the least, and this is a pretty prime example of it. By the way, the game is currently being listed as a 0-0 draw on the Greek Super League site. So they whatever the referee decided in the moment has been reversed again, I guess. And
the referee is somewhere hidden in witness protection relocation.
Yeah, which is and the league is suspended, and the Greek Sport Society is saying you can't start back up until you have a plan of how to deal with this, and yeah, it's a mess, and it's not easily fixed either, because other than to suspend these owners and to these are historic big clubs, and to me, when you're looking at something like this, the only way to deal with this is to suspend that club from competition, to relegate them or something, and that's again, how do you do that safely? And that's a terrible thing to have to consider, but that's really where you're at this point. And is it fair to the players? Is it fair to the fans? Well, maybe not, but I don't know how else you deal with it. You got to get this guy out of the game, clearly, and
and it's too bad that it's because of the Greece economy that followed the Athens Olympics that left the situation with clubs available for a takeover from outside money, and that's what we're seeing the result of. I'm not saying that it's outside money creating this, but it's the terrible economic reality of Greece since the mid-2000s that led the groundworks there to have the possibility of people with outside money coming in and taking ownership of historical club and running amok with them.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, too, because it sort of takes away interest in, Olympiacos has won that league year after year after year after year after year after year. You could go on, they've won it 50 of the last 55 years or something crazy. But to have someone have a title race that's actually fairly tight this year be marred by this. It's like, well, that's why I don't pay attention to the Greek Super League, right? So.
Yep. That's why I'm not going to pay attention to it a lot more either. And there was another incident, and let's finish quickly with this one because we still got a lot of things to do. But in Lille, France, supporters as well were protesting against the results of the club as well, and other reasons. And there was another pitch invasion there. Jeez, it's like a lot of pitch invasions this weekend.
Yeah, and look, I don't know that incident as well as the other two at the moment, to be honest. But what I will say is that the one thing that I lack patience on is protests against results. If there's other stuff going on, like, for instance, to bring this back to here, I've seen protests for ticket price increases here in Toronto, and I was supportive of those, but I was not supportive when similar people tried to do protests against just the fact they were losing back in the day. To me, it was like, that's part of the game. If you can't accept that, then you're not really a good supporter. So I'll look more into the Leon stuff to have a better comment on it, but there are better ways to go about this. As I said, tifos and songs and protests outside the stadium, that's the way to go. Inside the stadium, because really, if you're a player and you're seeing someone charging the pitch, especially in today's day and age when stuff happens, I mean, let's be honest, the world has dangerous and scary things that happen. You see someone charging the field, you're not sure whether he's trying to kill you.
Yeah, and it's like last Boy Scout stuff. You never know who's going to run into the field with a gun, because we just saw it happen this weekend.
Yeah, so it's not the way to go, folks. But we're preaching to the choir a little bit here, I think, on that one.
Yeah, let's just take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll wrap the weekend, and we'll give our medals and our Ballon d'Or, Balle d'Argent, Boule de Bois.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Boule de Bois, Duane. Boule de Bois, our ballon of wood for the weekend. And I'll start because I have a little chip on my shoulder here this morning. And I've talked about this in my French show, Duane. And my Boule de Bois goes to Chris Penso and the Pro Referees Association. It's not the first time. Chris Penso, born in Ohio. Not too far from Columbus, but nothing is really too far from Columbus and you're in Ohio. And Chris Penso, Duane, referees often games Columbus versus Montreal. And every time he does, like in the 2015 playoffs and like this year, there's penalty calls, 2 penalty calls for Columbus in this game. Were the penalty warranted? Yeah, was a foul in the box. Were there the same fouls done on Montreal from Columbus side? Yeah. Were those called? No. But my Boule de Bois goes to the perception of, time after time, putting someone from Ohio to officiate a game between Columbus and Montreal. Duane, it wouldn't bother me, but did you ever see a Canadian ref work a game, for example, Montreal or Atlanta? No, that would never happen. People go, why are you putting a French-Canadian ref to referee the French-Canadian team? But the other way around, we're supposed to accept it. I think it's not the first time that this happens. It's not the first time I talk about it. But you kind of want to take every possibility or every chance of controversy out of the game. Man, Chris Penso and Pro Referee, well, they did not. And then on Saturday, the first game of the weekend, 3-2 for Columbus on the road. Montreal did deserve better, but Chris Penso does deserve my Boule de Bois.
All right, fair enough. I will save my thoughts on Raheem Edwards' odd 20 minutes of play for the Canadian review. But, in terms of the perception thing, in the early days of TFC, they did actually have a lot of Canadian referees referee the games. And we actually had, I think it was Ken Lisker, or Ken Lickers, pardon me. I don't know. I just called him Lisker. Ken's a listener of the show that tracked the actual calls against TFC when they had a Canadian ref versus when they had an American ref out there. And he actually found that the Canadian referees overcompensated. So there was a bias happening, but it was against TFC because they didn't want to perceive to be biased. But at any rate, the perception is reality, though, and it is important to try and keep that sort of stuff away. Obviously, we're not asking for only Canadian refs to referee in the United States or something, but have someone from outside the state anyway. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, and someone sometimes that doesn't have the history of this, right? So, like I mentioned, it happened before and it happened again. And you did have a sense that in this game Montreal were hard done. Well, I'll give my full opinion on this a little later after our Ballon and Boule de Bois d'Or. But I did feel like even before the game started, I'm like, oh well, Chris Penso, here we go. It's gonna be. And I guess I do have premonitions sometimes. I guess my Nostradamus is my nickname because it happened.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, my Blue Bois, yeah, it's going to be a little less serious. It is going to be the Univision commentators' inability to pronounce Mark Anthony Kaye's name correctly throughout the match. They kept calling him Mark Anthony Kai. There's pronunciation.
Cobra Kai.
Yeah. Anyway. There's pronunciations, guys, and it really, I was losing my mind watching that game anyway, which was a bizarre game to watch. That was obvious. We'll probably talk about that we will talk about that in a minute again.
Oh, yeah.
But
in about two Boule and Ballon d'Or, we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So yeah, they kept grading on me and throughout the thing. So their lack of ability to read a pronunciation guide. That was their English commentators, which it's the most bizarre kind of commentating team ever. They also were like obsessed with the penalty call that would happen in that game, which was clearly a penalty. And then, oh God, and I could make another. I just don't want to belabor VAR, but VAR was frustrating as hell again this week. Yeah. So it could have easily won that. All right, that's my bronze.
All right, that's your Boule de Bois.
Wood. Yeah.
Me moving on to Boule de Bronze or Ballon de Bronze. Mine goes to Rémi Garde. And Duane, yes, you're gonna say, well, he lost 2 games. Why are you giving him your Boule de Bronze? Because as a head coach, as a manager, there's only so much you can do to influence an actual game while it's happening. Outside of choosing your starting 11, talking to the players in halftime and directive during the game too, and making a few changes, there's only so much you can do. And I've mentioned how this season Rémi Garde is discovering the league, discovering his staff, his players, and everything. Well, in the 2 games we've seen him manage in Major League Soccer, competitive games, Rémi Garde was able to dramatically change how his team played in the second half, dramatically change their control of the game, their control of the ball, possession, fitness of the team has shown a lot in the last two second halves and the 20 minutes of the last 2 second halves. Because of their high fitness, they're able to press more, to gain that advantage and press and to score and to push the games, which wasn't the case last year. But the directives and the adjustments that Rémi Garde is doing at halftime are actually generating results in the 5-10 minutes coming off of second halves. And Rémi Garde has almost, if not outcoached, his 2 opponents in the second halves. Yes, bad beginning of games cost Montreal a few goals already. But at least it's not in the end of games. And Rémi Garde has shown that he can positively influence his team heading into the second half, which, if you're looking at the entire season of MLS, and if you're looking at how teams are successful usually in this league later in the season, in the playoffs, you're learning, and then you're applying what you learned. This might bode well for Montreal fans, because if we're just taking the last 2 games as a base point here, as a point of reference, well, deep down the end of the season, Montreal's going to be very organized and tough to play against.
Observation that I made during the game, and most people kind of agreed with it. I had one notable person from out west who disagreed with me, but I thought that Montreal has played better in the second half of each of their games than they have in the first half. That led me to speculate whether or not there might be an advanced scouting issue happening here. Because he doesn't know the league, right? Like it's first time through. They're relying on information he's getting from the advanced scouts, which most teams in the world will implement. Yeah. And maybe he's not getting the best information there. Maybe they need to address that. Maybe they need to figure out how to improve that area of their operations, because clearly once the adjustments are happening in game, they're effective, but they're not starting these games well. So
yeah, well, just example, how Columbus was breaking down the passing lane easily of Montreal when they were coming in the final third on Saturday. They were easily finding a way to get someone open and the lane to give him the ball and create a chance. Well, that was not seen in the second half at all. So just that adjustment is so influential to the game. Like, it was influential to the result, almost to a point where Montreal almost stole a point or could have got the win. But yeah, so I think it bodes well, and I think it shows the quality of a coach of Rémi Garde. If anyone out there still had doubts, I think Rémi Garde is closer to Patrick Vieira than Aaron Winter. But I do understand what you're saying with the maybe lack of information of the opposing team. Scouting as a whole is something that a lot of Major League Soccer team could benefit from using a bit more of, and maybe more full-time staff in that department. But yeah, so let's move to your Boule de Bronze.
I'm going to go give my Boule de Bronze to New York Red Bulls 2. Because they basically
that's a good one.
They basically started they rotated. Jesse Marsh rotated 9 players because of the CONCACAF Champions League games this week. 9 players basically played all of the kids, which have mostly come through the Red Bulls 2 program, which we talked about in the last segment as being effective and very good and a champion just a couple years ago. And they won 4-0 over Portland, which we could talk about Portland maybe, and if this continues on this route, we might have to. But certainly great result for the Red Bulls, who so far this year are quietly, and because it's been mostly in the CCL, but are quietly laying claim to being maybe a sleeper pick that we're undervaluing. So we'll keep an eye on them closely. But being able to put 9 players on there to rotate that strongly, that's impressive. So the New York Red Bulls 2 get my bronze for the Boule de Bronze for my week.
And it's a good segue because my boule de silver, my boule d'argent, my ballon de silver goes to Jesse Marsh. Because we don't talk a lot about, like, we've talked about his decision to trade Dax McCarty and trade other big players and captain for 2 years in a row and having a team with not a lot of superstars but a lot of players to work and are willing to dedicate and sacrifice whatever it takes for the benefit of the club. And, Duane, I have to call a spade a spade. Jesse Marsh has some Ballon d'Ors with him too, because I have to say he's not afraid to take a decision that won't be popular, but still it's for the benefit of the team. And the way this team is performing so far is telling me that maybe Jesse Marsh has a way better scouting eye, way better eye for talent, in extrapolating them into his own team and his own program and concepts and play style and system. And I think that vision is important, and I think that vision is going to long term continue to have Jesse Marsh as a good coach in this league, if not a good coach in the national team level for the United States eventually down the road, because I think Jesse Marsh is the American Marc Dos Santos. Jesse Marsh will, in my mind, be one of the most important head coach for the national team of the United States in a few years. And that's what he's building. The way he manages his teams, his recruitment, his coaching. And coaching doesn't give the right justice to me. It's almost the teaching aspect of Jesse Marsh, and that is impressive to me. Plus, had the cojones aspect. Yeah, Jesse Marsh got some gumptions. Let's put it that way.
And Canadian national team fans should remind themselves that Jesse Marsh wanted that job when they gave it to Benito Floro. So there you go.
What could have been? What could have been?
Well, and I'm an advocate for them hiring an American coach eventually, but nonetheless, that's a topic for a different day. Certainly, kind of ties into mine. Obviously, my argent is going to go to Mr. Finley from Minnesota. Nice. Ethan Finley. Yeah, look, 2 goals brace. Obviously, we're falling into that brace, get onto your player of the week sort of consideration, but it's hard to ignore. And more to the point, it's Minnesota getting that win against Orlando, and all the haters out there that were telling me I was an idiot for picking Orlando at the bottom, and maybe that's a bit extreme. 4 points dropped at home already. Just putting it out there.
Well, they're not used to playing in the heat. Oh wait, nobody is at this point.
Yeah, well, a bunch of old players that are running around. It's not that hot yet either. So, and Orlando doesn't know what they're doing. There's that as well. But nonetheless, 2-1 Minnesota wins that game. I got to give them props. And it's more, Finley's got the brace, so he's going to get the silver. But I'm going to give the overall Minnesota a nod as well, because we're pretty hard on them. We've called them the worst team in the league. A lot of people have. So for them to go out and get that job done is something that's impressive, and I wanted to acknowledge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is impressive. All right, let's move to my Ballon d'Or. My Ballon d'Or for week number 2 is LAFC / Diego Rossi. Yes, Carlos Vela played pretty well too. But Diego Rossi, Duane, establishing himself as a goal provider, assist provider, 3 goals and 3 assists in 2 games. 2 goals and 3 assists against RSL in the weekend. What happened at the Riot? I don't know. But LAFC 5, RSL 1, Mike Petke, head coach of Real Salt Lake, apologized to the fans and to everyone, saying, I kind of don't know what happened. It's one of those days where everything just goes wrong. And Diego Rossi creates a lot, and Vela's there, and Sima's playing solid so far. Yes, he's playing solid like a Sima, where sometimes you're out of position. You have to make that spectacular dive, save, slide, tackle to save a goal opportunity, but he still does it. And so far, the captain of LAFC has captained his ship to 2 straight victory, the first ever expansion team to win 2 road games to start their storied first-year season.
I'm still not entirely convinced by
Neither
LAFC.
am I, but 6 points.
Yeah, you can't ignore the points in the border, points in the pocket. We said that a lot last year, and it's true. I mean, they have 6 points, and there's no one taking that away from them, so that's what matters most of all. Yeah, they didn't look great against Seattle, and they held on, and they look pretty good at times here in this game. First off, yeah, no, Rossi is obviously my goal. So my Ballon d'Or. So there you go, and he will be my Player of the Week vote when
Same here.
I get the email.
Finley's going to be second.
Yeah, it's an obvious sort of choice, and look, it was an interesting performance for sure, and RSL looked okay for about 30 minutes, and then they sort of started to get, once they got that second goal against them, I don't know what the hell happened there. I do have a theory about Kyle Beckerman, and maybe, sometimes athletes hit walls, and I think that Kyle Beckerman in front of that back line being asked to do what he did in the past is maybe a step too far, and they're just not able to replicate that, and they might need to move him more into a
offensive role, yeah. Not as important defensively role, maybe. Or maybe not as big of a field to cover, because that's a big difference, right? If you look at his heat map from like 2012, it was basically from sideline to sideline. Now he can't cover as much, and it shows when the breakdown of offensive team versus RSL.
Yeah, and I was even going to say maybe more of a community ambassador role, but maybe
that's harsh.
It's pretty harsh, yeah. Look, I thought that he was a problem in the game, and maybe that's easy because, he doesn't stand out with the hair anymore, but who he is. He is the big name out there, and if he's such a key proponent. You can imagine if Michael Bradley in Toronto slowed down, take 10 steps away from Michael Bradley and ask him to do the same things he does now. Obviously, TFC would suffer for that. And I think that RSL might be suffering that same way. They have not started well, despite the fact that a lot of people have expected them to do so. They need to address this quickly because they haven't looked very good. Them and Portland are the mystery so far this year for me in terms of what they're playing.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. Absolutely. All right, so we're done our medals, and let's finish the show with a Canadian review, Duane. And for the second week in a row, we only have 2 games to talk about because Toronto FC was having a bye this week and getting ready for their second game tomorrow night versus Tigres in Monterrey. But Vancouver Whitecaps, let's go there. Vancouver Whitecaps were traveling to Houston to play against the Dynamo, and Kai Kamara scored his second goal of the season, this one on a PK, with Brek Shea opening his account with an assist of Kai Kamara. And the Vancouver Whitecaps have won their second game of the season, 6 points out of 6. Kai Kamara, 2 goals and assists so far this season. Davies has scored as well. The Whitecaps are firing on all cylinders so far.
Yeah, look, I thought that was more impressive than the win over Montreal, to be honest with you. Certainly, Kamara, he's doing what people have suggested that he's stylistically fits with the Whitecaps, what they want to do. And I think there's some truth to that. He is, he scored, it was his 300th appearance and he scored his 100th goal. He's a 1-3 scorer.
That's not bad. When you're looking at it for MLS, in the history of MLS, it's not bad at all.
Yeah, and he's a guy that does have a history of being successful in situations for a year or so. So if Vancouver can milk that for the most of they can, then yeah, certainly he might be a good fit for them, and they might allow them to be able. We neither one of us picked them as a bad team, right? We picked them as a bubble team for the playoffs.
Yeah.
So if they can be a fourth place team instead, still don't think they're a first place team. I think they need to improve at the back line a little bit for that to be better. And Houston, I wasn't too sure what to make of after that first week result, which I think we sort of have a better idea now that they're probably about the same as Vancouver. And it was two evenly matched teams, and Vancouver with that Breck Shea goal in the second half. Shea, who didn't even start the game, obviously came on for DeJong after DeJong kind of frighteningly went down with that weird sort of looked like he took sick or something. Good stuff for the Whitecaps, and so far so good. We'll maybe have to we have to eat some crow in Vancouver maybe if they continue on this road.
Vancouver, Toronto in the MLS Cup final. Why not?
Yeah.
Don Garber's favorite Major League Soccer MLS Cup prediction. Now, it's time to talk about the Montreal-Columbus game. I've talked about Chris Penso and my Boule de Bois. I've talked about Rémi Garde and his adjustment to the game. Duane, what impressed me is the character that Montreal showed and how defensively they're organized. Way more than those 3 goals conceded would tell. And of those 3 goals, let's break down those 3 goals. 2 penalties and 1 on a free kick. Set pieces. Oh, that's a shocker. Montreal having trouble on set pieces. Oh, wow. It's not like we were ever good at set pieces. It's not like it's something we didn't know. Something that's been the same since before MLS. Anyways, but if you take those situations out of the game, Montreal on the actual run of play was full measure against Columbus. We're able to show that maybe they're better than a lot of people predicted, yours included. And I have to say, give Rémi Garde another few months or weeks to adjust and to know the other teams. And here's my bold prediction for today. I think Rémi Garde, whenever he's going to face a team that he's faced before, he's going to win those games. Why? Because of what you mentioned earlier too. The lack of scouting, maybe, the lack of information against the other team. And once he has that information, analyzing that team for 30, 45 minutes, he does make the right adjustment. Put that on a bigger scale, so he has a lot of times to... His notes must be like very big. He must have a big binder with him taking notes. And the next time he plays Columbus or Vancouver, trust me on this one, Montreal's going to be even better. So have a feeling that it's going to be a lot better than anticipated in Montreal. Maybe not a playoff year, maybe not battling for the Eastern Conference, top of the Eastern Conference, but a lot of progression, a lot of better soccer, of more control, of more replicable results, and not just one-offs. Like if you go have a Didier Drogba running on scoring goals, it's hard to replicate over the long term. And I have a feeling that this is what's going to happen. And I'm pretty sure that Chris Penso is not going to call another penalty on Montreal for a few weeks at least. So Montreal might have a shot of getting a victory soon enough. But I am impressed by the 2 second halves. And it's a tale of knowing your opponent maybe a little better and starting off games more importantly. But if I had to choose between the two, starting off games good or finishing games good, I'll take the finishing games good.
Yeah, to a point. I mean, the set piece thing is particularly bad right now, and it does have to be addressed if Montreal is going to be successful this year. They allowed.
Sorry to interrupt. I have an hypothesis for that. I have an idea why the set pieces are that terrible. Montreal spent a lot of time working on their fitness foundation at the beginning of the training camp. For like 2 weeks solid, they ran across the pitch and didn't have a lot of working with balls, right? That time they spent working on fitness and the foundation of the fitness that did generate results late in games so far. So it is important, but it's time that you cannot use to work on set pieces on the training pitch. So something's got to give, and I think they chose set pieces to give because you can work that throughout the season, and fitness you kind of need to be there to begin with. So I think, and that's my humble opinion, that is the reasoning behind the lack of training on the set pieces aspect.
Well, no, that's a fair apocalypse. Well, maybe it's apocalyptic. They don't.
Maybe it will be an apocalypse, but it's a good hypothesis.
Hypothesis, yes. the other thing is that just personnel-wise, I think they do need to address. Well, we know that they have problems at the back in terms of the injuries and everything else, and they probably will be addressing that in the summer window. If I'm Montreal, I'm looking. Obviously, you don't want to go against your philosophy in terms of skills and ability to play the ball, but I think maybe they do need a tree back there. They need someone that has a little bit more height. They're a little undersized at the back, and that contributes to this, particularly off the corners. So that might be something they need to address. But, I thought the second half was encouraging for Montreal for sure. And I understand your theory and share it to a certain extent that they will finish the season better than they started because he's going to understand the league more by the end of it, which will also, even if you think about that, even in a recruitment standpoint, give it 4 months and he's going to go, okay, this is the type of player that will work here more than this type of player. And that's something you can learn off and get better recruitment going as well.
And just to finish quickly, the rumors of Alejandro Silva signing for Montreal from Lanús are more and more loud. They're louder every second. There's apparently an agreement on principle, so we'll see if there's anything announced in the next few days. And apparently he's going to be in Montreal in the next few days to sign a 3-year contract. So we'll see if that happens for the midfielder from Lanús for Montreal. And Rod Fanny just arrived from Montreal last week, was on the bench. Former Olympique de Marseille player that actually scored against PSG last year. He scored against Paris Saint-Germain. So we have a goal scorer against Paris Saint-Germain for Montreal, and he's tall. He might be a little bit old, but Rod Fanny is tall and could be that tree that you're talking about that Montreal needs.
All right. We do like to keep these around an hour at most, so we should wrap soon. But I did want to briefly bring up Raheem Edwards' bizarre 20-minute schedule out there. He scored what could be the goal of the week, and then gives up the penalty.
Kroliki had a lot to do with the penalty too. I think it's like 60-40 for Kroliki, because Kroliki actually makes him fall. Raheem Edwards just trips over himself and falls on the guy falling already. But I think it's Kroliki. But I have to say, you're right. He had great influence on the game. Scored a great goal, but he did not have a perfect 20 minutes either. That penalty is an example.
Yeah, the penalty I thought was bad luck, almost, because it looked like he caught the trailing edge. I mean, I guess you got to be more self-aware. You got to be more self-aware of your body, I guess, is how you could criticize him for that. But I hope it doesn't necessarily prevent him from getting playing time based on that mistake, because, as I said, sometimes stuff happens out there, and it's a lot of the criticism, particularly on the broadcast, I thought was a little over the top for him, because it was just a bit of bad luck too, but unfortunate for Montreal for sure. And that goal was, oh my God, that goal was spectacular.
That cross by Lovitz, 2 weeks in a row, Lovitz does amazing. Lovitz should have three assists so far, because Mancosu should have scored a second last week. But Lovitz is showing me a lot of impressive stuff, and I have to say, Raheem Edwards as a super sub, I kind of like that better than starter versus Vancouver. It's just a very, very small sample of data here, but I do feel Raheem Edwards coming into as a sub with for Jason Vargas, who Vargas played very well, by the way. We didn't talk about him, but Montreal hit twice the woodworks on Saturday. Should have scored 2 more goals. Montreal should have scored 4. And Vargas is one of the... Sorry?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'll let you continue, but I think you probably want to start him next week, though. Do you think you'd want to start him against Toronto because he might be more motivated?
Yeah, I would imagine so. But that was impressive to me. But Edwards coming in, influencing, and when you come in late in the game, you don't have to If we go back to against Vancouver on the right side, I'm going to wrap it up quickly, but just on the right side line against Vancouver, Petrasso was getting eaten by Davies, and same for Edwards. And a lot of the flack went on Petrasso last week, but it was kind of Edwards' fault, because Edwards was not picking up Davies anyways, and we're letting Davies coming by with speed attacking Petrasso, which leaves no chance for Petrasso to do anything with the Alphonso Davies. But this week, it was more on the left side, so it was a little easier on Petrasso, and Edwards, when he came in later on, and Edwards was able to have his influence on the game and could have created even a win. We'll see. But no, I agree with you that against Toronto, you kind of have to start him just to make sure that he has that chip on his shoulder for Toronto not protecting him in the expansion draft.
Yeah, fair enough. And my last thought, and we will wrap after this, is that Montreal fans have already seen everything that Toronto fans knew about Raheem Edwards in terms of his dynamic abilities and occasional frustrations that you come from that. That's a young player thing, though, so hopefully he can continue to learn and evolve from that. Good start for the Canadians across the board. Also, it's been a good start for Canadians, but there's also been a few penalties caused by Canadians. There's actually been 3 penalties that have been created by Canadian players so far this year. So, although I don't agree with the one in Orlando, I thought that was a harsh call. But anyway, I'll end it up.
It's the year of the Canadians. Never mind the year of the dog, Duane. It's the year of the Canadian player. I can't remember seeing as much Canadian contact, not just in Montreal but across the league, and it's kind of fun.
Maybe back in the early part of the last decade, there was a little bit more Canadian perception of Canadian, but that was mostly D-Road. This is there's more players on more teams now for sure.
All right. As always, you can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee, live Monday to Friday at 10 a.m. on youtube.com/sports podcast network. And we want to take a second to thank every single one of patrons out there that gives us $1 or more a month to help us pay the cost of bandwidth, the cost of microphone, the cost to do a high audio quality podcast for your listening pleasures. It's our pleasure to do it, and we do love your rewards when you do give us $1 a month, $2 a month, $5 a month, and we thank the generous souls out there who even go deeper than that and go to $10 a month. We thank you a lot. We encourage you to continue. Starting in April, the Two Solitude Soccer Podcast will come back in a one shape or form for patrons only, focused on the Canadian Premier League and Canadian content. So you can become a patron this month to make sure you do not miss the launch of this show next month. And we thank you a lot for your support over the years. And as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.